Hello and good morning, evening or afternoon depending on where in the world you are listening to COP28 Covered, broadcast live from the ground of the UN Climate Summit in Dubai by the ED editorial team. It is Wednesday the 6th of December, which in COP28 language is the thematic day dedicated to buildings and transport. It's also the halfway point. We're officially 1 week into the 2-week process. That is provided, of course, that we finish on time. You are listening to the voice of ED's Deputy Editor, Sarah George, and I am joined out in quite a nice cool evening here in Dubai, just outside the famous Al Wasl Dome. Finally, at last, by our editor, Matt Mace.
Hello, it's good to be back.
Good to have you back. Coming up in today's show, we have 2 back-to-back interviews with experts at COP on electrifying road transport from trucks to sports cars. We also have another edition of What's Hot and What's Not at COP to get you up to speed on today's news in brief, news on our listener quiz, and I'm sure some quick-fire analysis of today's fossil fuel furore and a brief reflection on the week that has been as well. All of that and more coming up in today's episode of COP28 Covered. Yes, hello and a warm welcome to COP28 Covered, ED's podcast live from the Climate Summit hosted in collaboration with the UN's Race to Zero campaign. As I've already mentioned, it is Transport and Buildings Day at COP and I'm once again in the green zone. But something that you might have noticed that is new is the fact that you're listening to me instead of our publisher, Luke Nichols. Luke has abandoned us, really. Luke has headed off-site to a high-level meeting of climate folks from the UK, including the COP26 president, Alok Sharma. So we'll see who he's seen and what he's been up to shortly. But for today, I'm coming at you from the green zone with our much-missed editor, Matt Mace. Matt, how are you doing?
I am surviving. It's been, I don't think I'm going to sugarcoat this by saying I've hated most of my time in Dubai. I think this is my 3rd day of, 8, I think, outside. The rest have just been in the Airbnb, typing away in my room, going stir crazy. I started my own podcast with the lamp and the plant, but it didn't really get anywhere because it was just me talking to myself. I felt just, it was a weird mix of pride of how good the site's been, even with me not really being able to kind of get out and interview people, and also just kind of a slight bit of jealousy that I've just been locked away. I very much felt like what probably nature felt like at previous COPs, where it's like, I'm here, I'm important, but I'm not being able to do anything.
Oh, you've come up with a little joke metaphor. Mine was going to be that you've dropped in quickly like Rishi Sunak. You're only here for a few hours on the podcast, but you want to shout about it anyway. We could talk about the terrible time you've had being sick all day, to be honest. We know we love to complain about each other's health on this podcast, but it'd be great to hear about the day you've had. I understand it's your first day on the green zone, so what have your impressions of this venue been?
Yeah, really impressive. It's green by name and kind of green by nature. We're sat outside in just this row of small kind of trees. To the left of us, we've got the big white domes, and it just feels like a very calm, soothing, relaxing place. You've got the kind of piped-in bird song, which you might be able to hear on the podcast. You've got people kind of rolling past in electric kind of transport wagons, which was not a novelty we had at Glasgow, much smaller obviously, and also quite fitting that it's Transport Day and we've seen so many of these electric vehicles. But it just feels like quite calm and serene, and certainly much better than a room in an Airbnb.
Yeah, it is really nice. And Matt, as peaceful as it is, I'm not going to let you slip off into nirvana, because with me standing in for Luke, that means you have to stand in for me. And we know exactly how much news comes out of COPs, the pace that it comes in. It's just mind-boggling to keep up with, to be honest. So in all of his wisdom, Luke launched this feature on this podcast called What's Hot and What's Not at COP. Big tongue twister, asking me for 2 to 3 things that are hot at COP, so things that are positive that we've loved to see, and one that's what's not, so something that's really missing or something that has proved controversial, and I'm sure there's no shortage of those. So am I all right to hand over to you for the December 6th edition of What's Hot and What's Not at COP?
Yeah, sure, it's about time I've done something, so...
Here's Matt with what's hot and what's not at COP today.
I think we'll start with obviously what's hot, and there's a couple of things that spring to mind, mainly in the kind of buildings aspect of this day. The first is the breakthrough agenda, the buildings breakthrough, which has basically been signed today by 27 countries, pledging to work together under a shared goal to make near net zero emissions buildings the new normal by 2030, basically. Together, the nations that are involved, the UK isn't a part of that, by the way, they represent around 34% of the global population, account for more than half of global emissions, and contribute approximately 2/3 of the global GDP. So it's a massive coalition of countries that are going to focus on adaptation and mitigation to ensure buildings are being built beyond 2030 can withstand climate impacts whilst also being net zero itself. And it's going to be kind of fact-checked, or kind of the unofficial watchdog, I suppose, of this initiative is going to be the International Energy Agency and the International Renewable Energy Agency, together with the UN high-level champions. They're going to take annual assessments of global progress in that sector. So a really kind of welcome one to start with. Moving on, and again sticking with the kind of adaptation and resiliency theme, is a new report that came out today, which basically has finally made the business case for adaptation and resiliency. We've seen lots of research that, you know, between 160 and 340 billion dollars is essentially needed each year to drive long-lasting climate action that focuses on adaptation and resiliency as the climate changes, because we're beyond that kind of tipping point. The climate that we live in 2030, 2050 is going to be different from the one now, regardless of whether 1.5C is met. And today, the Boston Consulting Group with the Global Resiliency Partnership unveiled, alongside the US Special Presidential Envoy, John Kerry, this report that basically says that right now, for every dollar that's invested by companies in adaptation and resiliency measures, so things like water storage and water reuse systems, between $2 to $15 can be yielded in financial benefits. And looking ahead, you could get to a point that your company is kind of worth 9 times its current revenue in the future. So currently, companies focus on resiliency, building mechanisms and investing in adaptation are seeing benefit to cost ratios from around 2 to 1 to 15 to 1, and sometimes even high as 50 to 1. And the report states that some companies, you know, depending on what sector in food, health, water, energy, can generate 77 to 1 ratios. So we're finally seeing some business case for that. And then moving to the what's not hot, it's a kind of common theme with this COP. Oil and gas still has very much a huge presence here at COP28 in Dubai, and the Climate Action Against Disinformation organisation has today claimed that large oil and gas businesses have placed more than 5,000 advertisements on things like Google and YouTube between the 30th of November when this started and the 5th of December yesterday, while most mentioning sustainability. So they're really kind of trying to align themselves to the green aspects of COP. An Influence Map has highlighted how the claims in these adverts could be misleading. As we all know, oil and gas firms are pivoting small parts of their kind of portfolio to green solutions, but that's a kind of tiny fraction of its total spend on the energy transition, which is still very much oil and gas focused. So yet again, another day where oil and gas continues to kind of muddy the waters.
Yeah, I have a fun stat on that, which is that the IEA said just before this COP that the biggest oil and gas companies are actually putting just 3% of their total investment into renewables, even though that's probably what you see on 97% of their adverts, as you've mentioned, Matt. So thank you so much for bringing us what's hot and what's not, and powering on through. Nary a cough or a sneeze to be seen. Just a reminder though that everything that we've talked about news-wise, not regarding our personal preferences and health status, are on the ed.net website. So if you want to look at the stories that Matt has mentioned, those are all on the homepage right now. Let's crack on with the interviews. We've got to go fast because we've spent so much time just catching up, Matt, but also because it is Mobility Day, and as you've mentioned, sustainable mobility is really on display here in Dubai inside the venue. There are e-scooter rentals, e-bike rentals and buggies that you can hop on if you're lucky enough to have a driver willing to give you a seat. I will say though that the car parks to this place are probably just as big as the actual thing, and that I've seen more SUVs here than I dare to even think about. So it's definitely a mixed picture. But as usual for our interviews, we're going to focus on the good things, on the technologies of the future that are here today. So once again, I've been out and about in the green zone, running around, sweating in a pink outfit, podcast recorder in hand, all to deliver you these 2 guest interviews, which I'm going to play for you now, back to back. So today I've been in the mobility petal of the green zone, as you might expect for Buildings and Mobility Day, specifically looking at the Technology and Innovation Hub, where outside you'll see an array of super interesting vehicles, including a big white truck that has no place for the driver to sit because it is autonomous. So here to tell us a little bit more about that solution, how it's becoming rapidly commercially mature, is Robert Ziegler, who is the General Manager for EMEA at Einride, the company that is here showcasing that truck. Then it was a quick dash across to the Dome to catch up with Julia Palais, who is VP for Sustainability at Formula E, after their biggest event of the week here at the Alif the Bowl stadium. And there are so many stunning buildings here. I'd say that this one is shaped sort of like a 3-leaf clover. It has 3 kind of petals, but instead of being green, it is metal stacked on top of each other. So very striking, very impactful. And speaking of impact, Julia is here to run us through the potential of transformative impact for sport, not only in communicating and showcasing what is possible and making these topics a bit more relatable and a bit more sexy, but also in moving supply chains. So once again, back to back, we're speaking to Robert Ziegler, General Manager for EMEA at Einride, and then Julia Palais, VP for Sustainability at Formula E. Yes, a hearty welcome along to the Green Zone on Transport Day here at COP28. It is busy here in the Green Zone. I've seen more school trips than I can count, and something else that there is an abundance of is really innovative vehicles. I've seen everything from luxury hydrogen cars to electric motorbikes, and I'm now stood next to an autonomous zero-emission truck from Einride. And I'm here with the company's General Manager for the EMEA region, Robert. Thank you so much for your time on the podcast. How is your COP going so far?
COP's extremely interesting. It is very large this year. There are obviously a lot of political stakeholders here, but also this is probably the COP that has the most intersection also with business. At the end of the day, if we want to have policies implemented, we need to make sure there's also business that can actually be made. So business needs to be here to basically, at this intersection of policy making, to make sure that the policies actually get implemented and they actually have a long-term effect.
Great, and yeah, we're here at the Technology and Innovation Hub this afternoon. So for those who don't have the pleasure of seeing what we're stood next to or knowing much about the company, could you give us an introduction to the company and to this super interesting vehicle that we're at today?
Well, we're a technology company that's a little bit difficult to put into a box because we provide the full ecosystem for going digital, electric, and autonomous. So we provide a digital platform that manages logistics transports on the roads. We provide also the vehicles that are fully electric. And we do that also with vehicles that are electric and autonomous. So therefore, have no driver, have not even a cabin. So you reduce the complexity of the vehicle by about 60-70%, and you run fully sustainable transports.
Got it. And it would be great to hear a little bit more about where you operate and where this technology is, commercially viable at the moment. I know you have a global presence and quite an enviable list of corporate partners.
Yes, we work directly with many shippers. Both in the grocery retail space, but also in FMCG and their suppliers. So we're working our way up basically from the consumer through the supermarket to the factories and to their initial suppliers as well, so back into the value chain. We've been able to sign up a large number of really prestigious international brands, both in the grocery retail space and in FMCG and suppliers. we're quite happy with how these things are going. These companies have a very high obligation on going sustainable. And this is how we usually get into contact first. But then very quickly the discussion changes, and they're starting to realize that doing transport digitally increases reliability. Going electric is not just sustainable, but also more affordable. And that going autonomous is basically securing them for the future. And so this is our vision of where we see the transportation industry going: digital, electric, and autonomous. And these large companies are seeing that, and they're following suit in that, and they're willing to take the leap, I would say, into a new technology that they're not used to, that you need to operate differently, right? Because already switching from a diesel truck to an electric truck, you have to manage differently. I come from the transportation industry, where basically you hand the driver their freight papers, and then if you're lucky, they call you back 2 days later that they delivered or not. And then if you're even more lucky, you get the freight papers back via mail, snail mail, that is. And if you're really lucky, they scan it and they send it to you attached to an email. So that's digitalization of the transportation industry today. But we're doing it's quite a different level. So we're really managing the client's transport A to Z on our digital platform. We have full integration with the telematics of the vehicle, full integration with the battery management systems, full integration with the charging infrastructure. So we can plan out the day-to-day operations and logistics for our shippers and make sure that charging becomes part of the operations. So it's not like you do with a diesel vehicle that you would run empty and then you would go to a gas station and fill it up. But you build the charging into the day-to-day. So whenever a driver takes a break, you charge a little bit. If you load the truck, you charge. If you unload the truck, you charge. So we need to make sure that also the charging infrastructure is where we need it. And that's why we build that charging infrastructure customized to our customers' needs.
Yeah, I did want to come on to that, because it feels like with both the charging infrastructure and the electric vehicle technology itself, it's come on so rapidly in a couple of years. I remember even meeting with retailers a few years ago, essentially saying it's too heavy, it can't be electrified, it can't be done. And I know that Einride was founded in 2016, so really how has electric truck technology changed since then? Because from where I've sat, it looks like exponential change.
Yes, I mean in 2016, people thought we were a little crazy to think that trucking was going to be electric. We had to start in the beginning with retrofit trucks, so basically taking diesel vehicles and retrofitting them for electric. That's something that we've phased out by now, so we're now fully running on OEM-built trucks. So we have orders with Daimler, with Scania, with BYD from China, with DAF and so on. And we're buying their vehicles, and we're collaborating with them very, very closely, because they've realized also that companies like us, we create a demand for them to basically transform their business as well.
And I wanted to come back onto the evolution of charging infrastructure. As you've mentioned, it takes a different kind of day-to-day shift for the vehicle, and you need access to charging infrastructure at regular intervals, but you also need the infrastructure to be powerful enough to serve more than a car. So in what markets are this infrastructure the most mature at the moment, and why has that been successful in those places?
Well, with charging infrastructure, you really need to always make a local analysis. You can't generalize about one country or another, but really it's a case-by-case investigation that we need to go through. And then we install the capacity and also the technology that is actually needed because of the grid, because of the operational requirements and so on. So we customize that to the specific type of transport that we're doing. So far, we've never found any problems anywhere getting that done. Some countries are a little bit slower when it comes to permits. This is really one of the biggest obstacles. But if we find that, for example, grid capacity is not great at a certain location, then we combine that with battery technology that we put next to the charging infrastructure, so that we would then charge a stationary battery when there's availability on the grid. and we would then use that battery to charge the truck when we actually need it for operational reasons.
Something else I wanted to cover is why electric and not hydrogen. It feels like at the moment people in the UK are asking for clarity on what track of technology to go. Do you go LNG? Do you go a different kind of fuel? Do you go hydrogen? Do you go electric? So why is your company specifically in the electric space?
Because it makes sense. If hydrogen made any sense, we would be running hydrogen. That's the long and the short of it. Let me give you an idea. I mean, there's a lot of studies you can read from Cambridge University, also from Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, but lots of scientists have looked into this. And there's a lot of issues with hydrogen, but for me the biggest one is a commercial one. And that is that you're using, and this is, I think, very easy to understand for everybody, the specialist, but also the layman, using electricity to turn that into hydrogen. Then you transport that hydrogen somewhere else, turn it into electricity again, and then use it in an electric engine. So that means you're losing 70% of the efficiency of the original electricity that you've had. If you use that electricity directly on an electric truck, you use only 20%. So that basically means that on the mile, hydrogen is about 100 or 200% more expensive than electricity. And that is not going to be changed by any industrial process. That's just physics.
That makes complete sense. And Robert, I know we're nearly out of time, but I do want to touch on today's theme of transport, which I know will keep you busy for the rest of the afternoon. We've got all manner of transport solutions here. I'm aware that you had some solar power yachts. We have got some different kinds of trucks. We've got luxury cars. So why is it so important to look at trucking as part of the broader low carbon transport shift? I know you mentioned the retail clients, so I'm presuming part of this is supply chain decarbonisation.
Even easier than that. I mean, trucks make up about 1% of the vehicles on the road, but around 10% of the carbon of the overall carbon emissions of the world. So it is over proportional in terms of emissions. Also, diesel trucks emit, especially whether or not modern diesel trucks emit a lot of NOx and PM10 particles that are directly noxious or even poisonous. So there's a lot of reasons why you want to go electric. Another one is noise emissions, right? Electric trucks emit about 20 decibel of sound. A diesel truck is around 80, 90, right? If you hear a diesel truck driving by you, it's almost like a plane flying by. So with that, we can go into cities, we can deliver things at night to grocery retailers. We can make sure the trucks are out of the morning traffic, so it doesn't interfere with passenger traffic in the morning. You can make sure that you run more shifts, therefore you need less trucks again, so again a saving. With that, you increase utilization on the vehicles and make them more efficient again. So there's a lot of other factors that basically come in way beyond, just CO2 savings.
Heard of a win-win. It sounds like from that long list it's a win-win-win-win-win. So I'm sure you're going to get lots of interest in this truck today. I'm already seeing people milling around and asking your colleagues questions. So I'll let you go and mingle and get on with the rest of Transport and Mobility Themed Day. But thank you so much for your time, Robert.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yes, so as we head into the afternoon on Transport Day, I have raced over from the entrance to the Dome in the centre to meet Julia, who is the VP for Sustainability at Formula E, to learn about this really important and really, eye-catching part of the transport agenda. So Julia, thank you so much for your time. How's your day been so far?
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's been a wonderful day. We're literally just out the Formula E conference in the main zone of the green zone, so publicly accessible. And it's been a wonderful conversation to showcase how Formula E is using the power of its ecosystem, both from the racing and also the partnerships that it has established, to really advance the net zero agenda.
And I'd love to showcase that a bit more and dive into it, because we often hear about how sport is maybe a little bit behind in terms of climate, in terms of having sustainability teams in-house, but it has so much impact in terms of the general public. So what is the role of sport somewhere like COP, where you've not only got the general public, but you've also got those policymakers, those academics, those negotiators?
The power of sport is that it captivates the heart, the mind, and the souls of people. And politicians and businesses know very well, how powerful of a tool this can be for them. So I think that's what we represent. We're really the megaphone on how you can reach audiences, and I would say mass audiences, on some key topics that are not necessarily very easy to articulate. Sustainability is obviously very technical, can be quite, depressing from the facts point of view, but it's the duty of sport to first of all put their house in order, and second to elevate through their own basically platforms the fact that we need to live a more sustainable lifestyle and that we have solutions for it. I think that's the most important part.
And you mentioned lifestyle here, and I've just been over in the mobility petal looking at some e-motorbikes, some luxury electric cars, some trucks. So what is the role specifically of Formula E, which showcases these fast one-person supercars?
Well, Formula E has a very clear role. Our vision and our mission is to accelerate sustainable human progress. That's the company statement. It's not my sustainability mission vision. So it's very clear that we're doing that by using the power of electric racing. So we obviously showcase from the mobility perspective and I would say the everyday road cars that the solution to adopt sustainable mobility is electric cars and electric vehicles for the passenger cars. But there's a wider purpose and messaging there. First of all, we race inner cities, and we've been created as a championship at the heart of cities because of this very problem around air pollution and CO2 emissions at the heart of cities where 80% of the population is living. But also Formula E is a catalyst for change because we gather all the key industries and ecosystem stakeholders from the energy field, the banking field, the insurance field, the transport field that are really wanting to showcase that they are taking sustainability innovation seriously, implementing them in the championship, scaling them up for the rest of society.
It's fascinating stuff, and I know you say you've just had your most important event of the day, perhaps, and that you were hoping to attract like a really high-level crowd there. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about that. Apologies that I couldn't come along.
Yeah, it was a really fantastic event. We had two sessions that were one really focused on the race to road transfers that are enabled in the championship, and how we really are a technological laboratory to improve all the technologies around electric vehicles. The first couple of seasons we've been really focusing on the battery range and really making those cars faster and more powerful from the battery perspective. Now we're really looking at the other end of the spectrum around the infrastructure and how we're going to be testing and implementing ultra fast charging solutions during the racing. That is also going to increase the excitement around the race. It's going to be similar to a pit stop, but ultimately sending a very strong message to consumers on the fact that this is something that is going to be rolled out on their streets tomorrow. And the second part of the session was about this very important collaborative aspect that we have with our partners, and the fact that they are implementing their innovations, their technologies, their USPs within the championship. We were discussing with DHL about the use of sustainable aviation fuel. We were discussing with ABB about energy efficiency. It's all about energy efficiency also in the championship, and how all of these tested and trialed within the series then is basically the opportunity for those huge companies to replicate and implement at scale, which is going to be a game changer literally for our societies.
Yeah, it's so much more than just the cars that you see on the track, isn't it? The logistics of getting everyone around, the teams that develop the technologies, the technology partners. So I guess this is a sort of ripple effect in that way as well as culturally.
Absolutely, it's very much how we use the power again of the racing platform, but we send really the message with substance, obviously, that it's far more than a race. Of course, the racing is the best way to attract and I would say mesmerize people, but there's far more that is happening behind the scene. And again, the very reason why we race in cities is that it's all technologies that are utmost importance at the city level.
And you talk there about mesmerising people, and something that has captivated a lot of people's imagination is this car that's made entirely of electronic and electrical waste that's on display in the Blue Zone near the media centre. So I wanted to get your view on where the circular economy is at COP. I can say I haven't seen much of it coming out in the official negotiating rooms, but having a look around the Green Zone, I've seen so many great examples here. So yeah, what's your take on circular economy in transport and where that is sitting this COP?
I think definitely transport needs to play a bigger role in the circular economy approach and very much also transition that is part of the wider net zero transition. Envision have done a fantastic job to elevate that topic and showcase some of the issues that we are encountering as the world is using far more electronic system, especially electric vehicles, where the software is absolutely key in terms of the day-to-day capabilities of the vehicles. And at Formula 8, something that we've taken very, very seriously. Our latest racing car, Gen 3, was conceived literally with the principles of circular economy, starting from a life cycle assessment, design and perspective. So we've been taking the learnings of the carbon footprint of the previous generation of the car to basically put reduction targets for this car. And then we've put as a mandatory KPI for the tires, the batteries and the chassis providers, the fact that everything needed to be having a clear end of life, and if possible a second life that would be clearly highlighted even before producing the first units. And that was really important to us because we need to lead the way. We've used, for example, some recycled carbon fibers from the previous car seasons into the new chassis bodywork, and for us it's really an opportunity to elevate that this is a new technology that is available not only in motorsport but in wider industries. It's actually an innovation that is coming from the aerospace, which is a fantastic cross-pollination and collaboration over industries.
And I find it interesting, though, that you mentioned how this is an important part of the net zero agenda, but mainly on the discussions we're seeing in negotiation, it looks like it's not really one and the same sort of thing. So how can we advocate to get more people, including the decision makers here at COP, to understand that this is all connected?
Well, I think sustainability, as you rightly said, is everything is interconnected. You think about circular economy that will have a key contribution into the net zero strategy. Simply said, for example, the batteries of all cars, we've really pushed so that the cells would be, at least the cells minerals, would be reused, because if you extend the life of those components by recycling them and reinserting them, the cells and the minerals, first of all, are recyclable altogether over 90%, and they don't degrade. So you want to make sure that basically, especially when it's a resource, and we know resources are getting more and more difficult in terms of being accessible, but also it requires energy to get them. So there's a much more efficient way of looking at it by recycling, reinserting, repurposing, and then obviously you end up, if you apply that at mass level, you end up basically suppressing the issue of constantly using new resources from the Earth's perspective, and you also create new economic opportunities, because ultimately sustainability is about finding the right balance in making sure that you provide social prosperity, economic prosperity, and environmental protection.
And yesterday's theme was the just transition and energy, so we focused on that a lot in previous podcast episodes. So shameless plug for that before I do have to dash, Julia. But thank you so much for your time, and thank you for giving us a bit of a glimpse behind the scenes at the Formula E presence at COP28. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
So there we go. Thank you very much to Robert Ziegler, General Manager for EMEA at Einride, and Julia Palais, VP for Sustainability at Formula E, and also a big pat on the back, shamelessly, for me for running around and doing those interviews. Matt, I have to ask, from your sickbed, have you been keeping up with our podcast and taking part in our listener quizzes?
Even when we do our normal podcast and we do the quizzes and I'm actually in the studio doing it, I really don't enjoy that part because I feel like I'm going to get exposed. So no, whenever we get to the listener quiz, that's the point where I turn off. But I have been watching other than that. Listening, I should say.
I mean, it makes sense. There's also the fact that as a member of the ED team, you can't win the eco vouchers that we have on offer for the winners of the quiz. And before we round off for today, I want to confirm the winner of our £10 eco voucher from yesterday, the 5th of December. It was Energy Day, and one of our interviews was all about renewable energy generation and access in Kenya. So with that in mind, I asked the lovely listeners what percentage of global international renewable energy finance goes to Africa, according to the IEA. Do you want to put in a last minute guess on this one, Matt?
15.
Very optimistic. It's 3% this year, up from 2% last year. Our successful winner today is Eric Niguna. I hope I'm pronouncing your surname correctly, Eric, who has emailed in. He's a climate justice organiser for youth at Fridays for Future. So we'll be in touch with your eco voucher soon. The sun is slowly setting here in Dubai. It's drawing in, and this podcast is drawing to a close. I should mention that tomorrow is a rest day. There's no such thing as normal days of the week at COP. You get one rest day and it's on a Thursday. So there's not going to be a listener quiz, as we will not have an episode to announce the winner in. But maybe you'd like to spend some of your free time getting in touch. We're getting lots of emails, but it'd always be nice to hear from you. More comments, questions, queries and concerns, please, to podcast@fav-house.com. That's fav-house.com. We'll be back with a podcast on the 8th. I say we, but it will actually be Luke that's back on Friday, because Matt and I are jetting back to the UK during rest day, so we will be spending our rest day taking in some trash TV or maybe a new movie on the plane. But fear not, if we have any personal fans, hopefully we can join remotely, provided that we've not frozen solid once we arrive back in the UK. Before we head off, I am in a reflective mood with the sun going down and with the podcast coming to a close. And I know, Matt, that you've been reflecting on the week that was from your room. Nonetheless, what do you make of it so far? Good cop, bad cop?
Yeah, it's a tough one to ask, isn't it? It's kind of like probably leaning 55% towards kind of good cop. I think the stuff that's been announced so far is genuinely impressive. The loss and opening up the loss and damage funding was a huge kind of breakthrough already on that day one, considering how much of a sticking point that's been in previous COPs. We've got this kind of global stock take ticking away, which will ultimately kind of decide whether this is a good cop or bad cop. And the pledge to kind of triple renewable energy capacity globally from all those nations is massive and a kind of real market signal. And I also think stuff like the launch of the net zero data public utility by French President Emmanuel Macron with Michael Bloomberg, because of course Bloomberg's going to be involved, is a real kind of signal to the corporate sector that net zero targets have to have integrity behind them as well. So it feels like all the dominoes are kind of lining up in a row, and we just need that out versus down to decide whether they all fall down and this is a good cop, or whether they kind of just fall off, one falls off the table and all are left standing and just kind of wondering what could have been.
Yeah, or alternatively, I'd say we could push the domino and then it could hit any one of many options. From what I understand from the level of options that are still on the table with the text, it's all still to play for. So Luke, Edie's publisher, will be on the ground here to bring you all the latest news, views and analysis from the negotiating rooms and beyond. A final reminder that the next episode will be broadcast on the 8th. So until next time, it's a final live goodbye from Matt.
Well, it felt like my only live goodbye as well, but goodbye.
And it's also a final live goodbye from me. Goodbye.